Hi guys, it's Kamil here, and today we are going to talk about the history of the press from Gutenberg to the era of the internet, all based on this book, The Media versus the Mighty from Henry VIII to Donald Trump by Derek J. Taylor. Fake news. Mass circulation of information was out of question until Johannes Gutenberg invented the press. That allowed for mass for that era, production of printed pages. Funny enough, the mechanism that he used was around since Roman era and was used to squeeze olives into oil. He tweaked it, adding movable type, the element with reversely shaped letters that was able to produce documents with hundreds of pages. It's hard to overappreciate the significance of Gutenberg's discovery. This machine was what made religious wars of 16th century possible and was a pivotal element for creation of Protestantism. That machine made possible the mass movement in politics and religion by spreading ideas that could cross miles and go through the borders. That was the machine that changed everything and threatened the most powerful institutions. But what probably interests us more, it was the great and many times great grandmother of information era we are living currently in. Nowadays, information is the most powerful weapon. That is extremely overused too. We live in the era when information, regardless if published by well-respected, following journalist standards newspaper like New York Times, or information just being a tweeted and retweeted by conspiracy-seeking, having very little understanding of the world supporters of various theories, both are treated the same by some people. Both of them are thought to be equal. Article of New York Times and the tweet. I'll get to that, the age of internet, in the last part of this video. But let's go back to the Gutenberg and the years that followed. So, the first noted war between the press and the mighty, as you can easily guess, was during Henry VIII, when pamphlets against him and his plans to divorce Catherine of Aragon were spreading through the country. Most of them were about prophecies of Anne of Kent, who predicted that Henry VIII would die within a month after marrying Anne, while England within 6 months would be struck by the Great Plague. Henry and Cromwell fought back, publishing pamphlets in defense of the king. Not straight away, but 2 years later, when rebellion against the king broken up in Lincolnshire and Longshire. And this is how the information was started. Through next dozen of years, the mighty learned to understand the power of the press, while the press learned how to fight and also flirt with the mighty. There were people like Marchmont Needham, also mentioned here, that would sell its soul to whichever devil paid more, and would write against and then in defense of Oliver Cromwell and then King Charles II, raising another point that will be in discussion still today. Obviously, the objectivity of the press. And please bear in mind that we are not even in the time yet where there's guaranteed freedom of the press. People speaking against the mighty could still be easily put into jail, but also bear in mind that sometimes speaking against the mighty might have been very profitable. There are always fractions within those groups holding the power that would be very happy to see the strongest man get hit, right? The freedom of the press was guaranteed for the first time in the First Amendment to American Constitution in 1791, December, where it stated, Congress should make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievance. But now let's go back over the water to England, where we still have no freedom of press. After Waterloo massacre in 1890, the Six Acts Bill was introduced. Waterloo massacre was a massacre on unarmed people that gathered on St. Peter's Field in number of 60,000 to demand the right to vote. It was 1890. King's army was used against them, and dozen was killed and probably around 500 injured. Press up to that time was often used to spread radical information, radical ideas, like voting rights campaigns, like separation from UK in US pre-declaration of independence era, or reports of overuse of power of the mighty. It was used in form of pamphlets to advertise progressive thoughts, but there were two main factors that changed that. One, mentioned already, the Six Acts Bill, issued after Waterloo massacre, that among other regulations against blasphemous writing, introduced another one, stamp duty for pamphlets too. This tax was raised to 4 pennies per copy sold. Radical newspapers, whose readers most of the time, as it is right now, are the ones that are the most unprivileged, lost their target groups, as tax couldn't be passed over to the readers that couldn't afford it, while it was too high to be borne by the publishers themselves. This was the beginning of the end of the radical press, basically. And this is why it's always good to remember that taxes, when imposed, have one of 3 basic aims. Often those are combined, but sometimes not. It's introduced to 1. Provide revenue for the government, and 2. Redistribute wealth from the rich to the poor, progressive income tax system, and the third one, to avoid negative externalities, unintended bad results. The stamp tax is a perfect example of those. Today, tax on alcohol, cigarettes, etc. But bear in mind that as today its aim is mostly targeted at lowering the costs of medical treatment of those addicted to those substances, sometimes the taxes are established to sustain the status quo. I mentioned 2 elements that were the most pivotal that ended the radical press. The second one happened a bit earlier in 1814. UK The Times was the first newspaper to introduce a steam-powered cylinder press, which could turn out 1100 double-sided sheets an hour. Then it only increased with the evolvement of technology. And as you know, the technology costs. It requires the investment, and the one that might take a year or 2 or more to recoup. Therefore, it's only balanced out when huge numbers of copies are sold. The target group needs to be wider and needs to recruit from various social groups. Therefore, the information needs to have wider appeal and be easier digested by those that invest, while also those that are the readers. While radical thoughts and the ideas of revolution, however small, doesn't have that appeal. This is another element that destroyed the radical press. However, not to be too negative, there is also one positive element that comes with it, with the mass production. Even though the thought presented in the mainstream press that we eventually arrived at couldn't have been too progressive, not mentioning radical, the press needed to have one element that would make its readers come back for more information. It needed to be relevant and trustworthy, and that element, its reputation for accurate and unbiased reporting, was what came in. However, it took time before we got there, and also there are darker moments of the history of press, when the press, even the titles we know and appreciate today, were lost to understand, for instance, the suffrage movement, when it took time before Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter's protests were even reported. And when finally reported, it often came with some sarcasm. Remember, radicalism doesn't sell well. It's also first time probably in history when the enemies, the media and the mighty, joined up against big part of its society. Why did it happen? Because of the business that the press became. You don't earn money by supporting deeply unpopular causes. And women's rights to vote was such a cause. How suffrage movement pierced through to the wider audience? By hijacking the media. You know, media couldn't resist a good story. They cannot nowadays. The suffragettes were stirring up public meetings, trying to force handing the petition to the king in front of Buckingham Palace. All of that made them appear in the press. And as Pankhurst stated, doesn't matter how terribly we come out, there's one information that they wanted to pass over, and the information got through. There is a need for women to have the rights to vote. There is no such thing as bad publicity, right? If good press doesn't work, use the bad one, right? Look at Donald Trump campaign. Of course, one cause is noble, the other not, but the mechanism is still very similar. There is much more examples. First World War, Second World War we could talk about, but this video is way too short to cover them all. And for more, go to Fake News, the media versus the mighty, from Henry to Donald Trump. It really is a fantastic book, and all I said so far is pretty much directly coming from it. Now let me jump to the second half of 20th century, the appearance of television and how that changed the game. Probably not a lot of us think about it, and at least I wasn't, but it changed dramatically. What has changed was the perception of the information. Even in the most reliable newspaper, you always got it second-hand. Here you could have seen it through your own eyes. You saw your minister being questioned. You saw the pictures from Vietnam War. You saw it through your own eyes. That huge trust came with a huge threat that we understand also today. The way you are served the information can be manipulated, but our bigger faith in what is shown to us, rather in what we read, that moving pictures medium, be it TV, be it YouTube, be it whatever there is, evokes bigger trust. Because you see it through your own eyes. How can it be untrue? You saw how it happened. The TV reporting of the Vietnam War is often thought to be one of the reasons why American public grew tired of the war, grew more and more against it, and eventually USA withdrew from the war. But the main events that discredited the government are not the ones that were captured by cameras. Massacre of My Lai, Kent State shootings or Pentagon Papers, still the press was the one to report it. And that brings me to probably the most well-known battle between the press and the mighty. You know what I'm talking about, the Watergate. The Republicans wiretapping Watergate complex of Democratic Party didn't expect that it will end up with very popular president losing its support and stepping down. It took years and a lot of intimidation resistance, but Washington Post and mostly its journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, won the war with one of the most powerful men on earth, if not the most powerful. Again, the press, not TV. And that brings us to the age of the internet. I'll start with a quote from this book by Barack Obama that perfectly summarizes the threat of the internet and the access to widespread, often totally unreliable information. One of the dangers of the internet is that people can have entirely different realities. They can be cocooned in information that reinforces their current biases. I think it was Steve Donahue tweet thread that I saw recently when he was trying to meritorically engage in a conversation with Donald Trump supporter. And the supporter was just repeating again and again that Steve suffers from Donald Trump syndrome and was refusing any engagement in the conversation about the facts. This is the world we live in currently. People of biased beliefs would go into internet and read an article or even dozen about certain topics, supporting their own ideas without critically analyzing the sources and then validating it with counter-arguments. They will just get the information they need, and then even if you call out the statistics, the facts, they will just talk empty words and call you names, assuming you are just one of the brainwashed, not understanding what really goes on in the world. There's a great example here in this book also of Edgar Madison Welsh, a 28-year-old guy that probably with good intention of protecting innocent kids from pedophiles went with a gun to Comet Ping Pong, a popular pizzeria in Washington DC. It was December 2016 after Trump won presidency campaign. Welsh had recently installed internet at home when he heard that there's a pedophile ring connected to Clintons operating in DC. He started his research after watching various YouTube videos and then hearing Alex Jones, the hero of all conspiracy theorists, stating in his video, "When I think about all the children Hillary Clinton has personally, my emphasis, murdered and chopped up and raped, I have zero fear standing up against her. Yeah, you heard me right. Hillary Clinton has personally murdered children. I just cannot hold back the truth anymore." After that and many of the supporting evidences he has found in the internet, he located the place where the kids were supposed to be kept hostage and then trafficked further, and went there to rescue them. When he arrived at the place, he started looking for the tunnels, because that's what was reported on the internet. The kids were supposed to be kept in the tunnels. And he found nothing, and nothing else than standard pizza place would have. The place didn't even have a basement. Fortunately, nothing has happened. Nobody was killed, as Welsh was reasonable enough probably to just realize that it was all false. And he went out with his hands high and was captured by the police. Later on he pleaded guilty and apologized for what has happened. He was put in jail for 4 years. How the fake news spread? I mean, research shows that the Pizzagate, as the rumor about pedophiles using pizza places to traffic kids was named, was spread around internet with bots. Computer programs that look for keywords like pedophiles, Pizzagate or Clintons, and then just redistribute them to other users on Twitter or other social media. Then somebody like Alex Jones adds to it, and there are already people researching the topic and posting videos about it. And that is what we get. The guy with the gun in pizzeria. We don't know who started that particular campaign, but the participation of Cambridge Analytica and its interference with Donald Trump campaign is pretty well documented. Even Cambridge Analytica explain how it's being done. We just put information into bloodstream of the internet and then watch it grow. Give it a little push every now and then and watch it take shape. And so this stuff infiltrates the online community and expands, but with no branding, so it's unattributable and trackable. During congressional investigation, it was revealed that hundreds of Facebook fake accounts connected to Russia bought over 100,000 USD of advertisement targeting American voters. We have to understand that social media are social media only in one of its functions, where we share our lives with others. But it grew to way more than that. It grew to become a mass communication system we have never seen in the world before. This is a weapon we still are learning how to use. The studies show that Americans are abandoning traditional sources of information like newspapers and TV, and are turning to social media to see what's happening. In 2016, just 27% used Twitter and Facebook as their source of information, while in 2017 over 50% declared so. while the number of those that use traditional newspapers is dropping down in the same period from 38% to 22%. Derek J. Taylor comments on that in a very interesting way. Let's just put this in crude terms. More than half of Americans now think that anybody, absolutely anybody out there with a laptop, computer or an iPad, including crooks, liars and their country's enemies, is a better bet to tell them what's going on than professional trained journalists. It's been called a post-truth world, an ugly face, but then it's an ugly place to be. Social media are not only bad. Those were being used during revolutions in the Middle East for people to get together to protest against the regimes. Those are used in oppressed societies to spread the information without the need of having it written down and distributed hand to hand like in Stalinist Russia. Nevertheless, there is a huge need to verify your sources and verify the sources of information you are relying on. As it's extremely easy nowadays to fall into the trap of living in a total alternative reality. A cocoon where your life beliefs are reinforced by similarly thinking people living in the same bubble. Everything I talked about today is widely and more eloquently described here in this book. It's also something that you can easily look up on various web pages or respected newspapers. Do that research yourself when it comes especially to current events. Validate your sources. I cannot recommend enough this book that was sent to me for a review. Free copy is the only thing I get for the honest review, and I couldn't be more happy that it found its way to my hands. Clear, eloquent and fascinating history of the press and its struggle with the mighty. Strongly recommended. This was brilliant, guys. Okay, let me know what you think about all of that. This is a bit unusual video for me to make. Probably there will be some others similar to that coming up. Instead of a pure review, I gave you a bit of a summary of this book. And I hope you enjoyed it. Please let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I talk to you soon. Bye bye.